Hello, happy Sunday. It is spring. I think you can hear the neighbor mowing his lawn, but my lawn needs to be mowed. It's getting high out there, but my guy doesn't come. He might come today. That would be awful if he came right in the middle of this read. But I'm making headway on A Tale of Two Cities. We're about to finish the first book and the second unit of this publications division of units, and I'm cheating. I'm using them, so I'm giving credit to AMSCO Literature Program. Dinah, I'm wondering, hey, Lemma. Dinah, you said you might be listening along. I'm wondering, you're always good at research. I'm wondering if, hey, Furry, good morning. I'm wondering if this is still even in publication. I think this was the 70s. It was from one of my old schools that's not even open anymore. You know, you taught a long time when your schools are closed. Yeah, 1971 was the publication of AMSCO. So I'm curious to know if these are even available anymore, these teacher readers. All right, so this is chapter 6, The Shoemaker. So why is it called The Shoemaker? Sarab, hi. We're going to hear more. Remember, we discovered the father, and we're calling him Mr. Manette, but there was this hint at another name, a very Beauvais French name. They're in this community that has been established by the setting last chapter as really poor or hungry, famine. Are you? Well, good for you. It's not as bad here in Louisiana. I don't feel the impact of it as much. And as I've said, I keep saying my Brazilian, he's not Brazilian son, but my son who's lived in Brazil for 11 years, is coming home to visit. I'm so excited. He'll be here this time next week, God willing. And I'm just so happy about him coming, because I was supposed to go there and he was supposed to come here in the last 2 years, but because of the lockdown, we haven't been able to. So I haven't seen him in 2 years. Excited about him coming. So let's find out about the shoemaker. This is going to be all about the father. We're going to learn I don't know if we're going to learn all the mysteries. I promise you, we're not all the mysteries. Sarab, yes, I've read that about India. India, United States, and Brazil, I read this morning, are the 3 leaders. Something to be so proud of. But to take my mind off of it, I watched a new series that was released on Netflix called The Big Day, and it's all about traditional weddings, Indian weddings. Oh my gosh, the colors are beautiful. It just makes me want to go to India, and I'm like, well, Rachel, you know that it's dangerous there. You guys are still under curfew. I think a lot of countries are going back into lockdown again. So far in Louisiana, we're doing well. I have my 2 Pfizer, plus I had already gotten COVID. So hopefully I am protected, and I'm still very cautious. I wear my mask whenever I go out. I have my little hand sanitizer, and I really limit I had my groceries delivered yesterday. I really limit how much I'm out in public. So God be with us all. Hopefully it gets better. So in the meantime, let's read. Good day, said Monsieur Defarge, looking down at the white head that bent low over the shoemaking. Remember, we opened this dark room that's like a jail cell, and we see this white-haired man working, making shoes. It was raised for a moment, and a very faint voice responded to the salutation as if it were at a distance. Good day. You are still at hard work, I see. After a long silence, the head was lifted for another moment, and the voice replied, Yes, I am working. This time a pair of tired, haggard eyes, had looked at the questionnaire before the face had dropped again. The faintness of the voice was pitiable and dreadful. It was not the faintness of physical weakness, though confinement and hard fare no doubt had their part in it. Its deplorable peculiarity was that it was the faintness of solitude and disuse. Like, he doesn't talk. That's kind of what happens with my voice. I don't talk to anybody until I get on here, and it's all crackly. It was like the last feeble echo of a sound made long and long ago. So entirely had it lost the life and resonance of the human voice that it affected the senses like a once beautiful color faded away into a poor, weak stain. So sunken and suppressed it was that it was like a voice underground, So expressive it was of hopeless and lost creature that a famished traveler, wearied out by lonely wandering in a wilderness, would have remembered home and friends in such a tone before lying down to die. Some minutes of silent work had passed, and the haggard eyes had looked up again, not with any interest or curiosity, but with a dull, mechanical perception beforehand that the spot where the only visitor they were aware of had stood was not yet empty. So he's like, "Oh, are you still here? This is, I'm not interested. I'm aware." So he's very dazed. "I want," said Defarge, who had not removed his gaze from the shoemaker, "to let in a little more light here. You can bear a little more?" The shoemaker stopped his work, looked with a vacant air of listening at the floor on one side of him, then similarly at the floor on the other side of him, then upward at the speaker. "What did you say? You can bear a little more light?" "I must bear it, if you let it in," laying the palest shadow of a stress upon the second word. "I must bear it, if you let it in." So he's used to being a prisoner. He's not used to having any free will. And we're seeing all that laid out for us in this characterization. The opened half door was opened a little further and secured at that angle for the time. A broad ray of light fell into the garret and showed the workman with an unfinished shoe upon his lap, pausing in his labor. His few common tools and various scraps of leather were at his feet and on his bench. He had a white beard, raggedly cut, but not very long, a hollow face like he hasn't eaten, he's thin, and exceedingly bright eyes. The hollowness and thinness of his face would have caused them to look large under his yet dark eyebrows and his confused white hair. So you get this picture of a really wild-looking man. White hair, a straggly, an unkept beard, bleary eyes that look much bigger than they are because of his face. Oh, the wind just blew the door upstairs shut, and it surprised me. So you've got this picture of this, really emaciated, skinny, confused, dazed, dark eyebrows, wild white hair. Hey, Sid. It's a good visual image. Under his yet dark eyebrows and his confused white hair, though they had been really otherwise, but they were naturally large and looked unnaturally so. His yellow rags of shirt lay open at the throat and showed his body to be withered and worn. He and his old canvas frock and his loose stockings and all his poor tatters of clothes had, in a long seclusion from direct light and air, faded down to such a dull uniformity of parchment yellow that it would have been hard to say which was which. He had put up a hand between his eyes and the light, and the very bones of it seemed transparent. So he's like, oh, that light is bright. So he sat with a steadfastly vacant gaze, pausing in his work. He never looked at the figure before him without first looking down on this side of himself, then on that, and then he looks up. I wonder why. As if he had lost the habit of associating place with sound. He never spoke without first wandering in this manner and forgetting to speak. "Are you going to finish that pair of shoes today?" asked Defarge, motioning Mr. Lorry to come forward. "What did you say? Do you mean to finish that pair of shoes today?" "I can't say that I mean to. I suppose so. I don't know." But the question reminded him of his work, and he bent over it again. Mr. Lorry came silently forward, leaving the daughter by the door. When he had stood for a minute or two by the side of Defarge, the shoemaker looked up. He showed no surprise at seeing another figure, but the unsteady fingers of one of his hands strayed to his lips as he looked at it. His lips and his nails were the same pale lead color. And then the hand dropped to his work, and he once more bent over the shoe. The look and the action had occupied but an instant. "You have a visitor, you see," said Monsieur Defarge. "What did you say?" "Here is a visitor." The shoemaker looked up as before, but without removing a hand from his work. "Come," said Defarge. "Here is Monsieur, who knows a well-made shoe when he sees one."
What you said.
Siri thought I said something to him. "Show him that shoe you're working at. Take it, Monsieur." Mr. Lorry took it in his hand. "Tell Monsieur what kind of shoe it is and the maker's name." There was a longer pause than usual before the shoemaker replied. I forget what it was you asked me. What did you say? I said, could he describe the kind of shoe for Monsieur's information? It's a lady's shoe. It's a young lady's walking shoe. It is in the present mode. I never saw the mode. I have had a pattern in my hand. He glanced at the shoe with some little passing touch of pride. And the maker's name? Said Defarge. Now he had no work to hold. He laid the knuckles of the right hand in the hollow of the left, and then the knuckles of the left hand in the hollow of the right. So he's like doing this, right? So if you have trouble getting lost in the words, which I oftentimes do, it helps me to like visualize it. And the knuckles, here are my knuckles of the right hand into the hollow of the left, the knuckles of the left hand into the hollow. Not that it matters, but it just helps you build the image in your mind. And I think a lot of times that's why reading comprehension is hard for so many people, because they can't see the story played out in them, in their minds. And so that's what I stop and try and do. See what the words are telling me. See the description. And then passed a hand across his bearded chin, and so in regular changes without a moment's intermission. The task of recalling him from the vacancy into which he always sank when he had spoken was like recalling some very weak person from a swoon, or trying, in the hope of some disclosure, to stay the spirit of a fast dying man. So he's just so weak. It's like trying to, if you've ever been around somebody that's been knocked out and they're, what? Who am I? They're trying to figure out their place. Did you ask me for my name? Assuredly I did. 105 North Tower. Is that all? 105 North Tower. With a weary sound that was not a sigh nor a groan, he bent to work again until the silence was again broken. You are not a shoemaker by trade, said Mr. Lorry, looking steadfastly at him. His haggard eyes turned to Defarge, as if he would have transferred the question to him. But as no help came from that quarter, they turned back on the questioner when he sought the ground. So he's given a number. He's given his cell number, right? Hey, Kelly. And Jarvis Lorry says, but you're not a shoemaker, are you? And the shoemaker is confused. So he looks to Defarge, who is to give him the answer, but Defarge doesn't give him the answer. I am not a shoemaker by trade. No, I was not a shoemaker by trade. I learned it here. I taught myself. I asked leave to, he lapsed away, even for minutes, ringing those measured changes on his hands the whole time. His eyes came slowly back at last to the face from which they had wandered. When they rested on it, he started and resumed in the manner of a sleeper, the moment awake, reverting to a subject of last night. I asked leave to teach myself, and I got it with much difficulty after a long while, and I have made shoes ever since. I asked, as he held out his hand for the shoe that had been taken from him, Mr. Lorry said, still looking steadfastly in his face, Monsieur Manette, do you remember nothing of me? The shoe dropped to the ground, and he sat looking fixedly at the questioner. Monsieur Manette, Mr. Lorry laid his hand upon Defarge's arm. Do you remember nothing of this man? Look at him. Look at me. Is there no old banker, no old business, no old servant, no old time rising in your mind, Monsieur Manette? As the captive of many years sat looking fixedly by turns at Mr. Lorry and Defarge, so he's looking at them. Some long obliterated, blocked out marks of an actively intent intelligence in the middle of the forehead gradually forced themselves through the black mist that had fallen upon him. He's recalling it. They were overclouded again. They were fainter. They were gone. But they had been there. And so exactly was the expression repeated on the fair young face of her who had crept along the wall to a point where she could see him, and where she now stood looking at him, with hands which at first had been only raised in frightened compassion, if not even to keep him off and shut out the sight of him, but which were now extending towards him. She's like scared, she doesn't want to look, and then she's like reaching out to him. Remember, she thought her father was dead. And this is a very romantic time period of writing, so it's going to be very dramatic. On her fair young face, that it looked as though it had passed like a moving light from him to her. Darkness had fallen on him in its place. He looked at the two less and less attentively, and his eyes in gloomy abstraction sought the ground and looked about him in the old way. Finally, with a deep, long sigh, he took the shoe up and resumed his work. Have you recognized him, monsieur? Asked Defarge in a whisper. Yes, for a moment. At first I thought it quite hopeless, but I have unquestionably seen, for a single moment, the face that I once knew so well. Hush! Let us draw further back. Hush! She moved from the wall of the garret, very near to the bench on which he sat. There was something awful in his unconsciousness of a figure that could have put out its hand and touched him as he stooped over his labor. Not a word was spoken, not a sound was made. She stood like a spirit beside him, and he bent over his work. It happened at length that he had occasion to change the instrument in his hand for his shoemaker's knife. It lay on that side of him which was not the side on which she stood. He had taken it up and was stooping to work again when his eyes caught the skirt of her dress. He raised them and saw her. The two spectators started forward, but she stayed with the motion of her hand. She's like, no, it's okay, because he's got this knife in his hand and he's standing up. So they come forward to protect. She's like, no, it's okay. She had no fear of his striking at her with the knife that they had. He stared at her with a fearful look, and after a while his lips began to form some words that no sound proceeded from them. By degrees, in the pauses of his quick and labored breathing, he was heard to say, what is this? With the tears streaming down her face, she put her two hands to her lips and kissed them to him, then clasped them on her breast, as if she laid his ruined head there, like she wanted to reach to her dad. Why do I always get emotional in books? If you've watched me for very long, you know these emotional scenes just bring tears to my eyes every time. You are not the jailer's daughter, she sighed. No, I know who he thinks she is. Who are you? Not yet trusting the tones of her voice, she sat down on the bench beside him. He recoiled, he pulled back, but he laid her hand upon his arm. A strange thrill struck him when she did so, and visibly passed over his frame. He laid the knife down softly as he sat staring at her. Her golden hair, which she wore in long curls, had been hurriedly pushed aside and fell down her neck. Advancing his head by little and little, he took it up and looked at it. He's looking at the hair. He's looking at the hair like he's holding the hair. And in the midst of the action, he went astray, and with another deep sigh, fell to work at his shoemaking. Then he drops it and he just goes back into himself. But not for long. Releasing his arm, she laid her hand upon his shoulder. After looking doubtfully at it 2 or 3 times, as if to be sure that it was really there, he laid down his work, put his hand to his neck, and took off a blackened string with a scrap of folded rag attached to it. He opened this carefully on his knee. And contained a very little quantity of hair, not more than 1 or 2 long golden strands, which he had, in some old day, wound off upon his finger. He took her hair into his hand again and looked at it closely. It's the same. How can it be? So he's got this not a locket, but this string with cloth, and inside the cloth are just individual. I can probably pull some strands of hair out. Yeah, they fell. So you know how when you have long hair, you always have, I don't know if you guys can see, strings of hair, strands of hair. So he has found that on himself, and he wrapped it around his finger. And then at some point he found a way to wrap it into some cloth and tie it on a string. And now he's pulled that out and compared it to the hair he's looking at. That's my visual for you. Now I've got hair everywhere. So Fatima, it's good to see you again. Thank you. Hebik. He took her hair into his hand again and looked. How is it? How can it be? When was it? How was it? As a concentrating expression returned to his forehead, he seemed to become conscious that it was in hers too. He turned her full to the light and looked at her. She had laid her head upon my shoulder that night when I was summoned out. She had a fear of my going, though I had none. And when I was brought to the North Tower, they found these upon my sleeve. You will leave me them? So this woman, to help you understand, it was his wife, laid her head upon his shoulder and left, as I said, long hair always leaves a little bit of strand of hair on him, and they found him. He found the threads of hair. Those were the words I said. I remember them very well. It said, "You will leave me then? They can never help me escape in the body, though they may in the spirit." He formed this speech with his lips, like, just let me hang on to this hair because it will keep me sane. He formed this speech with his lips many times before he could utter it, but then he did find spoken words for it. They came to him coherently, though slowly. How was this? Was it you? So he's looking at this young vision of what he remembers his wife to look like. She looks like her mother, right? And he can't, like, she's still the same age, and he can't understand it. Once more, the two spectators started as he turned upon her with a frightful suddenness. But she sat perfectly still in his grasp and only said in a low voice, "I entreat you, good gentlemen, do not come near us. Do not speak. Do not move." "Hark," he explained. "Whose voice was that?" His hands released her as he uttered his cry and went up to his white hair, which they tore out in a frenzy. So now he's going crazy. It died out, as everything but his shoemaking did die out of him, and he refolded his little packet and tried to secure it at his breast. He took the threads of hair and wrapped them back up and tried to put them back on his neck. But he still looked at her and gloomily shook his head. "No, no, no, you are too young, too blooming. It can't be. See what the prisoner is? These are not the hands she knew. This is not the face she knew. This is not a voice she ever heard. No, no, she was, and he was, before the slow years of the North Tower, ages ago. What is your name, my gentle angel?" Hailing his softened voice. So he's struggling. He thinks it's his wife, but he knows he's not that crazy. He knows it's not possible. "Look at me. Look how old I am. Look how young you are. You can't be her." Hailing his softened tone and manner, his daughter fell upon her knees before him, and with her appealing hands upon his breast. What a great scene. We learned so much about Miss Manette, Lucy, her name is. In this moment, she's sheltered, she's confused and lost, but she's so empathetic and compassionate. She's so gentle with them, and she stays that way throughout. "Oh, sir, at another time you shall know my name, and who my mother was, and who my father, and how I never knew their hard, hard history. But I cannot tell you at this time, and I cannot tell you here. All that I may tell you here and now is that I pray you to touch me and to bless me, kiss me like a father to a daughter. Oh, my dear, my dear." His cold white head mingled with her radiant hair, which warmed and lighted it as though it were the light of freedom shining in him. "Remember all the dangers of the day. Remember the scene we saw outside with the broken cask of wine. Remember the three Jacques. It's not safe to reveal his identity." So she's like, "This isn't the time to tell you, but trust me. Hi, Teen Idol." And Fatima, always, "You're so sweet about telling me I'm the queen. But I suspect you're the queen because you're so faithful in coming to see me." If you hear my voice, I don't know that it is so, but I hope it is. If you hear in my voice any resemblance to a voice that once was sweet music in your ears, weep for it. Weep for it. If you touch, in touching my hair, anything that recalls the beloved head that lay on your breast when you were young and free, weep for it. Weep for it. If, when I hint to you of a home that is before us, where I will be true to you with all my duty and with all my faithful service, I bring back the remembrance of a home long desolate, while you bring back the remembrance, while your poor heart pined away, weep for it. Weep for it. What good mental health. If you recall a loss, a past that you miss, cry. It's okay to cry. It is what you think it is, and I'm here with you. So often when we see people cry, we're uncomfortable, like, don't cry, don't cry. But she's saying beautifully, this passage is beautiful. Weep for it. It is gone, but I'm here, and I'm beside you, and I'll see you through it. She held him closer round the neck and rocked him on her breast like a child. If, when I tell you, dearest dear, that your agony is over and that I have come here to take you away from it, and then we go to England to be at peace and at rest, I cause you to think of your useful life laid waste and of our native France so wicked to you. Weep for it, weep for it. And if, when I shall tell you of my name, and of my father who is living, and of my mother who is dead, you learn that I have to kneel to my honored father and implore his pardon for having never, for his sake, striven all day and lain awake and wept all night, because the love of my poor mother hid his torture from me. Weep for it, weep for it. That repetition is beautifully crafted, though you AEP students notice the craftsmanship of this scene. Weep for her, then, and for me. Good gentlemen, thank God. I feel his sacred tears upon my face, and his sobs strike against my heart. Oh, see, thank God for us. Thank God. So in the middle of that sadness, she's thankful. And I mean, she's just a really pure character, and you need to get that from the beginning. Sometimes we're so jaded in our old age that we don't believe what characters tell us in these old stories. But she is this pure character. He sunk in her arms, and his face dropped on her breast, a sight so touching, yet so terrible in the tremendous wrong and suffering which had gone before it, that the two beholders covered their faces. Like it was so poignant and so sweet that these two toughened men, they look away to let them have that quiet moment. When the quiet of the garret had been long undisturbed, and his heaving breast and shaken form had long yielded to the calm that must follow all storms, emblem to humanity of the rest and silence into which the storm called life must hush at last, they came forward to raise the man, father and daughter, from the ground. He had gradually dropped to the floor and lay there in a lethargy like lifelessness. Worn out, she had nestled down with him that his head might lie upon her arm, and her hair drooping upon him curtained him from the light. If without disturbing him, she said, raising her hand to Mr. Lorry as he stooped over them, after repeated blowing of his nose, all could be arranged for our leaving Paris at once, so that from the very door he could be taken away. But consider, is he fit for the journey? Asked Mr. Lorry. More fit for that, I think, than to remain in this city. So dreadful to him. I want to get him out of here. I want to get him home where I can care for him. It is true, said Defarge, who was kneeling to look on and hear. More than that, Monsieur Manette is, for all reasons, best out of France. Say, shall I hire a carriage and post horses? That's business, said Mr. Lorry, resuming on the shortest notice his methodical manners. And if business is to be done, I had better do it. No, that's my job to line up the horse and the carriage. I'll take care of it. Then be so kind, urged Miss Manette, as to leave us here. You see how composed he has become, and you cannot be afraid to leave him with me now. Why should you be? If you will lock the door to secure us from interruption, I do not doubt that you will find him when you come back as quiet as you leave him. In any case, I will take care of him until you return, and then we will remove him straight. Both Mr. Lorry and Defarge were rather disinclined to this course, and in favor of one of them remaining. But as there were not only carriage and horses to be seen to, but traveling papers, and as time pressed, for the day was drawing to an end, it came at last to their hastily dividing the business that was necessary to be done, and hurrying away to do it. Then, as the darkness closed in, the daughter laid her head down on the hard ground close at her father's side and watched him. The darkness deepened and deepened, and they both lay quiet until a light gleamed through the chinks in the wall. Mr. Lorry and Monsieur Defarge had been made all ready for the journey, and had brought with them, besides traveling cloaks and wrappers, bread and meat, wine and hot coffee. Monsieur Defarge put his provender and the lamp he carried on the shoemaker's bench. There was nothing else in the garret but a pallet bed, and he and Mr. Lorry roused the captive and assisted him to his feet. I want to look up, sorry guys, I want to look up what a provender is, because I don't know, and I'm curious. That's the great thing about the internet. We can just see provender definition. To raise noun. Doesn't give a definition. Animal fodder. Food. Carrie, I've never heard provisions. I've heard before. That's interesting. So it's food. Learn something new, right? He brought the provender and put it this provender, this meat, and so it's the collection of all the food. It's a general term for the meal. And he and Mr. Lorry roused the captive and assisted him to his feet. No human intelligence could have read the mysteries of his mind. In the scared, blank wonder of his face, whether he knew what had happened, whether he recollected what they had said to him, whether he knew that he was free, were questions which no sagacity could have solved, no wisdom. Say anything with that sage in it is wisdom, sagacity. Kelly, if you're still out there, remember in one of our books, I could not pronounce that word to save my life, and you helped me with that. Thank you. Could have solved. They tried speaking to him, but he was so confused and so very slow to answer that they took fright at his bewilderment and agreed for the time to tamper with him no more. He had a wild, lost manner of occasionally clasping his head in his hands that had not been seen in him before. Yet he had some pleasure in the mere sound of his daughter's voice, and invariably turned to it when she spoke. In the submissive way of one long accustomed to obey under a courage, he ate and drank what they gave him to eat and drink, and put on the cloak and other wrappings that they gave him to wear. He readily responded to his daughter's drawing her arm through his, and took and kept her hand in both of his. He trusts her. They began to descend, Monsieur Defarge going first with the lamp, Mr. Lorry closing the little procession. They had not traversed many steps. They hadn't traveled many steps of the long main staircase when he stopped and stared at the roof and round at the walls. You remember the place, my father? You remember coming up here? What did you say? Before she could repeat the question, he murmured an answer as if she had repeated it. Remember? No, I don't remember. It was so very long ago. That he had no recollection whatever of his having been brought from his prison to that house was apparent to them. They heard him mutter, 105 North Tower. And when she looked out at him, it evidently was the strong fortress walls which had long encompassed him. On their reaching the courtyard, he instinctively altered his tread. He changed how he walked, as being in expectation of a drawbridge. And when there was no drawbridge, and he saw the carriage waiting in the open street, he dropped his daughter's hand and clasped his head again. He's afraid. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's been in jail so long. He's really kind of lost his mind a little bit. No crowd was about the door. No people were discernible to be seen at any of the many windows. Not even a chance passerby was in the street. An unnatural silence and desertion reigned there. Only one soul was to be seen, and that was Madame Defarge, who leaned against the doorpost knitting and saw nothing. Those of you that are curious, my AP students, look up knitting of the women of the French Revolution, of the Jacques community. The prisoner had got into a coach, and his daughter had followed him. When Mr. Lorry's feet were arrested on the step by his asking miserably for his shoemaking tools and the unfinished shoes, Madame Defarge immediately called to her husband that she would get them, and went knitting out of the lamplight. Through the courtyard, she quickly brought them down and handed them in, and immediately afterwards leaned against the doorpost knitting and saw nothing. Defarge got upon the box and gave the word, "To the barrier!" The postilion cracked his whip, and they clattered away under the feeble, overswinging lamps. Under the overswinging lamps, swinging ever brighter in the better streets and ever dimmer in the worst, and by lighted shops, gay crowds, illuminated coffee houses, and theater doors to one of the city gates, soldiers with lanterns at that guardhouse there. "Your papers, travelers! See here then, monsieur the officer," said Defarge, getting down and taking him gravely apart. "These are the papers of monsieur inside, with the white head. They were consigned to me with him at the—" He dropped his voice. There was a flutter among the military lanterns, and one of them being handed into the coach by an arm in uniform. The eyes connected with the arm looked, not an everyday or an every night look, at monsieur with the white head. "It is well. Forward," from the uniform. "Adieu," from Defarge. And so, under a short grove of feebler and feebler overswinging lamps, out under the great grove of stars, beneath that arch of unmoved and eternal lights, some so remote from this little earth that the learned tell us it is doubtful whether their rays have even yet discovered it, as a point in space where anything is suffered or done. The shadows of the night were broad and black. all through the cold and restless interval until dawn. They once more whispered in the ears of Mr. Jarvis Lorry, sitting opposite the buried man who had been dug out, and wondering what subtle powers were forever lost to him and what were capable of restoration, the old inquiry, "I hope you care to be recalled to life." And the old answer, "I can't say." So they rescued him. All right, those of you that are reading just to read for school, I'm not going to read any more from the book, but I am going, those of you who are interested in the teaching of this, I am going back to the Unit 2 section so we can discuss some of these questions. So this book has been broken down into different categories. One is fitting the jigsaw together. So Dickens does a great job putting all the pieces of the story. He drops little bits here and there, and you'll find that in the end, it all weaves back together, which is one of the craftsmanship I love about good writers. I love to see how all the pieces end up fitting back together. So some questions, some comprehension questions. Why is Mr. Lorry traveling to Paris? Why does he plan to take Lucy with him? So this is where you want to touch base with the basics for reading comprehension. So if anybody wants to jump in and answer, I'll give it a pause, but I don't think there's that many people here with me at this point. My kids are writing. They're all excited about their brother coming home. So he's coming to Paris because they have found out that this charge that was part of Tellson's Bank that was in prison all this time is now been found alive. And indeed, he's in the hands of the Defarges. And why is he with Lucy? Lucy Manette is a beautiful blonde, and that's the daughter. And she didn't know her father was dead. So just to recap, that's what we've learned. How many of you, like in comments below, how many of you were lost up until now? How many of you need to take that stop and recap? I think it's a really important technique in learning how to read and build your comprehension. Next question. Jerry Cruncher refers to himself as an honest tradesman and suggests that recalling to life would be disastrous for him. Keeping these comments in mind, what is Jerry's connection with Tellson's Bank? So Jerry, by the way, Jerry Cruncher is going to be one of those puzzle pieces that's important. So we're highlighting him. He works for the bank, and he's brought this message that Lucy Manette is coming to wait for her. Third question. Mr. Lorry says, it's 15 years since I came last from France. Why does he change we to I? Who might the other person have been? What is significant about the number of years he mentions? When Lucy mentions her father's story, what connection between Lorry and Lucy become a parent? Again, this is to get your reading comprehension put back together. We came across because he brought Lucy from France, and that's how he knew her. And that's where they're putting all the pieces together, that 15 years he's not seen her in all that time. And he's saying, I was a businessman. You were a ward of the bank, and it wasn't my responsibility. And I think he's trying to justify how he just let this orphaned girl remain orphaned. How does Mr. Lorry try to prepare Lucy gently for the shock? And remember, he keeps saying it's business, it's business. He's trying to prepare her for big news. How does the lock of hair saved by Dr. Manette serve to make the connection between past events and the present? So I kind of illustrated that for you, but would you have gotten that if I hadn't intervened? And I'm sorry if I don't give you guys enough time to put those things together, but my big point of doing this reading comprehension, these online readings, is to help build reading comprehension. And so we talked about how that, lock remained on him, and that Lucy, we can draw the conclusion that Lucy must look very much like her mother, and that little bit of memory he had of his wife is the connection he makes between he and Lucy. We need to know this, the tale of two cities. How does Lucy have roots in France and England? She was born in France to French parents, but she was raised in England all of her her childhood life. How the Defarges crossed the paths of Mr. Lorry and Lucy. What is their attitude at this time toward Dr. Manette? So we know, or we assume, that somehow or another they were the connection for getting him out of prison. We know that it's still very secretive. So we know there's some more information out there. I don't want to be a spoiler, but it's dangerous for all of them. They're very secretive about it. Now, I'm going to tell what they've written in the answer here, but it does give away some information. The child of the old master, that gives you the hint of the aristocracy and the servants. That's all I'm going to tell you there. Just remember those connections with the Defarges. They are also going to be characters that stay with us throughout. Then the next thing that unit wants us to look at is Dickens' mastery, and I've talked about this. Dickens' mastery of how he builds characterization and builds our characters for us. Mr. Lorry is a study in appearances. His outward manner contrasts with his feelings and impulses. What clues to Mr. Lorry's character are provided when we meet him in the inn? What other clues to his character do we get in his meeting with Lucy? So we see him originally, he's all dressed in brown. He's very proper. He's an older man. He's all business, right? But then how is he with Lucy? He's very protective and very gentle with her. And even though he says it's all just business, it's all just business, you can see he's got a tender heart. Later, we will learn the wild redheaded lady is Miss Pross, and she's going to also be an important character. How does he react to her blunt and overpowering actions and comments? He is a little submissive to her, right? He thinks he equates her to being that of a man, to have that aggressive demeanor of a man, which is really typical of the day. And we need to be aware of that. We see those stereotypes, those archetypes, they call them, of Lucy as the demure, innocent heroine. Miss Pross is going to be this manly protector. And so the protection has to have masculine qualities to it. I don't know if you notice this. These are those tiny things teachers pull out. But it says, how does repeated blowings of his nose add to our interpretation of Mr. Lorry's character? And that was in last read, so you might not remember. He's very emotional. He's, when you cry, you blow your nose. So that just gives us an indication he is softer than he plays it out to be. So then it asks to describe the characterization of Lucy. So what do you remember about her? So if we were in class, you guys would have answers. She's blonde, she's blue-eyed, she's petite, she's described as pretty. That's direct characterization. She's described as pretty. We know she's about 17. What do we learn about her as we go on? And I talked about that. She's very pure. She's very compassionate. She's very kind. She's stronger than people give her credit. Like Miss Pross is very protective of her, but she's stronger. She's more of a character. So if you like her at this point, you're on track. That's what the author wants you to do. And then how does Lucy's behavior toward her father reveal? So this is tracking to us how to develop characterization when we read. It's directing us to the hints that the author is dropping to us of what that author wants us to feel about the characters. Mr. Jarvis Lorry Kelly is a businessman. He is a banker for a British bank called Tellson's Bank, and he was the banker to the Mannettes. And he's supposed to be very proper and businesslike, but he's really a kind-hearted, grandfatherly character. So we go on to the Defarges. The Defarges are a source of mystery and a challenge to the reader. Their characters are developed for us by little touches and subtle hints. That's what I'm talking about. As a reader, if you really want to develop your reading skills, look at those hints. Authors don't drop words in that have tone or innuendo to them by accident. Not a good author. He's very carefully crafting these characters for us. So we get some hints about Defarge. He's got a sinister sense to him. We've got this weird Madame Defarge knitting. She always kind of pops up at these different times, lurking around. There's a lot of cautiousness in the wine bar, in the pub, the wine shop, not a wine bar. The exchange of the three Jacques' name, the codes, the cough code, and things like that. And remember, it gives us hints into the bitterness of Defarge. So he is a complex character. Why did he help to begin with? He's at risk in helping. Now we know that that was his old master. He had been the servant of Manette, but in the aristocracy of France. And if you know anything about the French Revolution, most of the French Revolution was because of the abuses of the aristocracy toward the common people, and the people that were starving, and the fishmongers' wives, if you've studied that in history yet, really overturned the whole. That's where they stormed the Bastille, which was the place that France kept all the weapons. Travel literature. Oh, Kelly, don't leave yet. See if you, Aman, if you can help Aman with that. Good travel literature. Aman, can you give me more insight into what you mean by that? Like, to me, this is not current, but it gives us insight into the French Revolution. It's more historical, but so help me understand what you mean by travel literature. A Room with a View, for example. Then we talk about Recall to Life is applied to Dr. Manette. And we know we dig. You remember all that repetition and imagery? We're digging him back to life. And then at the last of that of chapter 6, it says he was dug out. So we now have him dug up from the grave. He was a dead man for all practical purposes. And we have a very clear physical description of him. So you notice first you look at that physical characterization, because again, the author is giving us a lot of hints about a character through that physical characterization. He plays on the stereotypes we have. So he looks like a crazy old man. And then you can see his developing character. We have these minor characters, Jerry Cruncher, the messenger, and Miss Pross, who disappear. But I want you to know that they're going to be part of puzzle. They're going to keep reappearing. All right, the social and historical setting is the next section of this. So we have the setting that things are very insecure and dangerous. The travelers don't trust each other. You've got a lot of distrust set up, and that's going to be important. You need to be careful who you trust in this story, and you're going to find surprise twists along the way too, people that you didn't trust that you should have trusted. And that's being set from the very beginning. The spilled wine really is a great way to set the stage of the hunger and the disparity and the despair of the community, and the sense of blood, that eerie writing on the wall and wine, blood with it dripping down, just like and it foreshadows that the roads will run with blood. And you think about the French Revolution and the bloody rebellion and all that time. Something like simple travel log, like Che Guevara journey South America, or anything like travel logs of ancient travelers like Marco. Oh, okay. I mean, obviously the Odyssey is the first one that comes to my mind, and I hope to do that later. But let me think about that one, Aman. And are we connected on either Discord or on Instagram? If we are, remind me the name to look for, and I will think about that and come up with some answers. The Defarges seem able to see the horror of the time in perspective and to comment upon it subtly from time to time. The Defarges are going to really represent a lot. And is it the same name, Aman? He shows poor Monsieur Manette to those whom the sight is likely to do good. He is gentle with them, but we really do set the stage. Now, here's a historical note. Donna, my problem with the Odyssey, I have a version that I really like, and I can't think of the name of the translation, but I will hold it up and I mean, if you guys want to wait, I can see it on my bookshelf. Let me grab it, because I can't remember the translator's name. Yeah, it's Robert Fagles. And it's a really easy read. I mean, you see how long it is, but all of her books lately have been long. Um, Iliad, I prefer to the Odyssey. And the Iliad is also a travelogue classic. I'm on like that. But the Odyssey has a lot of adventure. And most people prefer the Odyssey. And they would say that would, of the three great Greeks. And I also love Antigone, but that's not a travelogue. But this really is Greek mythology and, um, this journey of Odysseus trying to get back to his home and it is so long. But this one reads really fast. And that's my problem, Dinah, is that not everybody's going to have the same um, translation. So I might try and do some research. This is the one my school taught, and I really enjoyed it. It was easy for the kids to understand. But if it's not what you guys are reading, then this is the smaller one, by the way, too, Dinah. The Iliad is even bigger than this. This one's Robert Fagles. Let me put it where you can see it. Yeah. And I don't know, is that backwards to you guys when I put it up there? It really is a fun story to read. So let me know. Let me know, Aman, if that looks interesting to you. And like I say, I may try and tackle that one next. I haven't really done any of the Greeks but that's the reason I haven't done the Greeks. And really, when you teach it, well, maybe Iliad more, you have to know your sides of the war. And the Iliad, you really need a map to all the places they go. And you need to know a lot about Greek mythology. And I never was strong in Greek mythology. I need to get my youngest son to come do that. He's so good at that. All right, so that was, now the next thing we want to go to, I was going to read this part. In 1358 in France, the peasants rose up in revolt against the nobility. The name Jacquerie was applied to them, the peasants. So you notice he called the Jacques, was applied to them, for the nickname Jacques had long been applied to the downtrodden French peasant. The name comes to life again in Tale of Two Cities. So you remember the three Jacques. That's where that all comes from. And so you've got that historical connection. If it wasn't for your YouTube channel, I would have failed my essay. Oh, I'm so glad you didn't. And I bet you would have made it. I bet you would have dug in and found it. But I'm glad it's being used to help kids do well in school. I'm so glad kids are reading, because I know as a teacher they weren't. They were going to the tools. Nothing against SparkNotes or Schmoop. I use them both when I need to remind myself of things or when I get lost myself. But there's nothing replaces the beauty of words put down and the building of, and that's what we're about to talk about, the craftsmanship and the characterization. I love that part. I think it makes us better humans. I think we better understand people when we see them in the safety of a story. So this next section that they divide down is reading in depth. So Dickens often makes a word do two jobs, and we'll see these parallels throughout the whole story. The word may have a simple meaning and a more profound one. When Dr. Manette, the example, is recalled to life, Dickens wants us to draw parallels between Dr. Manette's nightmarish existence and death itself. The cell becomes a symbol of the death in life that Dr. Manette had to endure. That's interesting. The Night Shadows. Chapter 3 is called The Night Shadows. How does the title both describe the time of day and also symbolize Mr. Lorry's misgivings? What does Dickens suggest by the sunrise at the end of the chapter? Sunrise is always hope, right? Isn't it? He makes our symbols obvious, the blood on the wall and the bursting of the wine cask. It's overpowering. It can't be contained. Like, this emotion can't be contained. It's going to break free. And so there's all that hope in the imagery. We use foreshadowing. We talked about that. The behavior of the people, foreshadowing their behavior when revolution comes, that they're going to come and just be wild. And it talks about Madame Defarge as foreshadowing. A lot of irony. Dickens is known for being the master of irony. He uses irony to comment on the great differences between appearances and reality. The guard of the Dover Mail could, if the light were blown out, shut himself up inside, keep the flint and steel sparks well off the straw, and get a light with tolerable safety and ease, if he were lucky, in 5 minutes. What does Dickens really think of the guard's ability to get a coach lamp in a hurry? He thinks the job is a long, difficult, chancy one. The guard cannot find the lamp in a hurry. I mean, that's minuscule. That's not, I don't think, a great example, but Lori calls himself a man of business, unfeeling and mechanical. We talked about that. Why is his description of himself ironic? Because he's neither unfeeling nor mechanical, right? We talked about that. He's a humorist. So we might not have found this as funny, but his sketches of, of mundane, ordinary things are kind of what he's known for. And so you can look for his satire. I wouldn't really call it humor the way we define it now, but, kind of making fun of society. He's making these social commentaries. Okay, we've got a lot of metaphors we've talked about. Not a real true lesson that I've given here, but I hope I've given you some literary device insight into how to analyze this story. Let's finish. Our last word in this chapter was coercion. In the text, it was in the submissive way of one long accustomed to obey under coercion, he ate and drank what they gave him to eat and drink. So context clue, the prisoner insisted that coercion had been used in extracting a confession from him. So what do you think coercion means? Enforcement? I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Encouragement, force, quiet, observer. So let's take that about an observer would be a noun, right? And under coercion, he ate, and it said, insisted that coercion, well, that would be a noun in that case. But would the prisoner insisted that observer had been used in an extracting a confession? That doesn't make sense. So what was used? Replace the word. The prisoner insisted that force had been used in extracting the confession for him. So force is the correct word for coercion. So when you're trying to figure out on those standardized tests how words work, play with them a little bit. I know time is of the thing on the standardized test, but if you do activities like these regularly, you'll get better and better at extracting meanings of words with context clues. All right, guys, we got through our second unit. I think there are 14 units total. We have finished the first book. We're going to do the second book, which changes. It's 5 years later. It's going to start 5 years later. I hope you're enjoying A Tale of Two Cities. It's really a beautifully crafted tale. It is a tale. If you haven't already subscribed, and if you are one of those weird people out there that are getting money by linking your porn site to my books, please stop exploiting my readers. I work really hard to develop this. Nothing against you and your porn site. Target people that are adults that want to spend their money and spend their time that way. Hey, Steph. So that's my little, every single time when I finish recording and it gets uploaded, some unknown name puts a link and it's always porn. I always click it because I don't want to delete it in case it's a bookmark. So be careful if you're bookmarking the time. If you make it look at all like these guys do, I'll delete your remark and I'll report you. So if you're bookmarking, just say I'm bookmarking. So I know that that's what you're doing. And now that's probably what the porn people will do. But it makes me angry when people take advantage of good resources to do things like that. Enjoy your Sunday. If it's beautiful where you are, get outside, feel the air, listen to the sounds of spring, the lawnmowers, the birds. I love the breeze that blows. And I've already worked on my tomatoes this morning. So I don't know what I'll do the rest of the day. It looks like my son in Brazil has tried to reach out to me, so I'll probably communicate with him. I've already done chores this morning, so my laundry's done. Got to go back to work tomorrow. Thank God for that job. And those of you that are fasting, God give you strength to get through this Ramadan and keep your mind focused on other things of encouragement and good thoughts. And those of you who have subscribed, thank you. Keep joining me, keep reading with me, keep learning, keep growing, and I will read to you next time. See ya.